Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Sunday Feast virtual program for New Seva Kunj, the house of Sri Sri Kishore Kishori, Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Marani, and Gauranitai. My name is Chaitanya Kishore Das. I will be your host for the Sunday
Hare
Feast
Krishna.
program.
Welcome to the Sunday Feast virtual program for New Seva.
Sorry for that. We have a very special announcement today before we start the program from the Temple Council, represented by Balram Prabhu, Subal Prabhu, Radharaman Prabhu, Navin Krishna Prabhu, and Paramatma Prabhu. They're on the call. Over to you for the announcement, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you all very much. This is the new Chicago Temples Council, represented by Radharaman Prabhu to my left, Subal Prabhu to my right, and we have Navin Krishna Prabhu and Paramatma behind me. So we are very grateful for this opportunity that the GBC has bestowed upon us to serve Sri Sri Kishore Kishori and our congregation here in Chicago. We have a couple of announcements. We thought this would be a good opportunity for all of us, the council here, to talk about the temple opening. This is a topic that many devotees have approached us individually, collectively, asking about when the temple will be opening. So the date that we have finalized is so next Sunday, the 18th, the temple will be open normal hours. And then the 25th, the following week, we're going to be opening the temple also during the Sunday feast. So we're going to be having our first in-person Sunday feast, I think after almost a year and a half now, on July 25th. The same time, 5:30, Chaitanya Kishore Prabhu, who's now going to be managing the Sunday feast, there'll be communication out so you are aware of what's happening. Also, we have another special event happening on July 25th. Like last year, as most of you are aware, we did an indoor Rath Yatra. Actually, today happens to be the official Rath Yatra that takes place in India in Jagannath Puri. So we're going to be having an indoor Rath Yatra July 25th from morning 10 to 4. Now, like we did last year, we are expecting all the devotees, guests who would like to participate to do the registration. So there's going to be slots allocated based on the registration. Like if you're familiar with how we did last year, we're going to be doing it the same this year as well. So there will be more communication that will come out in the next few days, weeks, so that you are familiarized and then you can register yourself. But we wanted to take this opportunity to, mention this and let you all know that we are here to serve you. There will be an official email that will go out in a few days, and also there will be a short video by the council giving you some insight into what we are planning to do here in the Chicagoland for the next few months and years. So again, very grateful for this opportunity to serve all of you, and thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for that announcement, Balram Prabhu. It's a very exciting news. It's been an year and a half. We have not seen devotees, and it will be a very great opportunity for us to start associating again from July 25th. Thank you so much for that announcement. So continuing with our program, we will have, the program goes like this. We will have a short Narasimha Prayer by Kirtanya Gaur, who is basically a student of Radhakund Mataji's Vamsi School of Music. And then we will have our speaker, His Grace Harisham Prabhu, give us a Sunday Feast talk. Before I introduce the speaker and we move on with the program, I just wanted to read a small words of inspiration that come out in the Sunday mailer by our founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This goes like this: every individual being must have his opinion. That is significant of individuality. But all such differences of opinion must coincide in Krishna. This is written by Srila Prabhupada to one of his disciples in a letter dated July 28, 1969. It's a very nice meditation, just to start off the next week. So with that, with those words, we will go ahead with our prayers. So please unmute yourself, Kirtanya Gora, and let's have the Narasimha prayer.
श्री नरसिंह भगवान की जय। भक्ति श्री श्री प्रहलाद महाराज की जय।
Thank you so much for a wonderful Kirtan, Gaura. Your voice is really very sweet. So we will start with our Sunday feast speaker. I just want to give a small introduction to Harisham Prabhu. Obviously, every one of us know him, but he has been with us from 2013. He has been in the ISKCON Chicago congregation. He is currently a full-time devotee trying to establish a center in the south side of Chicago near IIT. Where he teaches practical bhakti yoga, practical skills, life skills to enthusiastic people. And he has been traveling all over the world. He has been to Germany and some parts of South America as a traveling preacher. So he has quite a good lot of realizations. He's very much interested in studying philosophy, and he actually maintains a very beautiful blog. I just saw that in the mailer. It's Be Wise and Be Happy. So please do take some time and look at his blog. He has nice discussions out there. So he has titled his class as When Bhakti Blooms in the Heart. This is in continuation to our Brilliant as a Sun series, the overview of Srimad Bhagavatam. He's going to go over the third canto, chapter number 25. So over to you, Prabhu. We are so grateful to you for taking this opportunity.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Prabhu. I really appreciate it, and very grateful to be here. Kirtaniya, that was an amazing. Those are really beautiful Narasimha prayers. Your singing is almost as good as your basketball playing. Not sure if you're still there and you can hear us, but that was very beautiful. And thank you for the devotees who are joining from the UK. So really nice that you're here online tonight. And Nikhil is joining all the way from India. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, we'll start with the invocation prayers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschattate Shatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubheva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So before I really begin this class, I think I would like to say one small thing. To really fully dive into this particular chapter, it's a really beautiful chapter, and I feel really grateful to be able to speak on it. It's the glories of devotional service. And sometimes, I feel bad. Chetan, you'll appreciate this. Sometimes when speakers have to speak on chapters like the Bhu Mandal or the creation of the universe or the expansions of Lord Brahma, and you're thinking, this is very nice, ecstatic. It's the Bhagavatam, but where do I go from here? And what can I pull out from this chapter? Of course, many wonderful speakers speak on the Sunday feast and they find wonderful realizations. But this particular chapter, it's almost like you have to really pick and choose what to talk about because there's so much. In fact, about 8 or 9 of the verses in this chapter are quoted regularly by Srila Prabhupada in his lectures and purports. So I was just floating in this ocean of where do I pick from and where do I start? So I have a certain theme for my class. The class is called When Bhakti Blooms in the Heart. The idea is, what is the result of Bhakti blooming in the heart? And when does Bhakti bloom in the heart? And so both of these ideas of when Bhakti blooms in the heart and what happens when Bhakti blooms in the heart are brought to light in this very beautiful chapter. But I really feel like to truly appreciate this chapter and relish it and really learn from it, I'd like us all to go back to a certain space in our life when we were completely clueless about the purpose of our existence. Chaitanya Kishore, perhaps you were young and wild in high school, playing a lot of cricket, watching Shah Rukh Khan movies, jumping off of trains. I don't know. I don't want to superimpose my youth upon you, but there was a time in your life when you didn't know what the goal of your life was, right? So before we start, for those of us who are on the Zoom call, and if anybody on YouTube wants to type in the chat box, can we just take one or two reflections on, do you remember what you were like when you did not know what the goal of your life was and you were just living a life of just gratification or sort of material pursuit? Can you say one or two lines about that self of yours, that old you? Does anybody remember who that was?
I can certainly say that, Prabhu. I was really wild, and I wanted to make it big, earn a lot of money.
Yeah,
That was our dream.
yeah. Right, be the next Satya Nadella or something like that.
Yeah, he was not there around that time.
Be the next, maybe what, Narayan Murthy, or who were the big
Yeah.
CEOs in those days. Shahana says, I was wondering, constantly searching, jumping from one new hobby to another, never fulfilled. Yeah, I remember that also, just trying something new, always visiting a new country, trying a new hobby, taking classes in dancing, or trying a new restaurant, or meeting a new group of friends, just hoping something will satisfy me. Anybody else? Does anybody else want to share one brief reflection about who the impressing everyone else? Krupa says, yeah, always living for the satisfaction of others, right? Always comparing our appearances, our activities, our actions with, will it make others happy? Okay, no private messages, please. This is too distracting. People are sending private messages. So yeah, that was the old self that did not know. Nikhil says, I was running behind multiple dreams at the same time, but later I realized I wasn't reaching anywhere. One needs to be jack of all trades, master of few. Right. Oh, wait, yeah, one. So you wanted to be the jack of all trades and master of few, right? Chasing multiple dreams at the same time. Adam, we're just starting out the class by helping everybody go back to who they used to be before they figured out what the goal of their life was. And so I'm asking everyone to share one or two lines, brief reflections, just a brief reflection on, do they remember their old self? What were you like? What were you doing? How did you think about yourself? Do you want to share something, Adam? Because I feel like that state of mind is going to really help us appreciate the direction and or where this chapter in the Bhagavatam really takes us. Okay, maybe he's not able to speak up right now. Venu says, running after one thing after the other. Right, and this is a very common theme, right? Venu says this also, Shahana said this also, Adam says basketball, pretzels, and shoes. And knowing Adam very well, he used to play basketball 6 hours a day, eat about 2 or 3 pounds of pretzels, and had a collection of 20, 25 Air Jordans. So just think about so many ways in which we were sort of living out our existence, hoping to find meaning and happiness. And that's kind of where this chapter really begins. It's a conversation between Kapila Muni, who is a great sage, an incarnation of Krishna, and his mother Devahuti. And his mother Devahuti is asking him a very profound question, that, my dear Lord, I am captured by the twin ropes of I and mine, the false ego, right? So you can imagine, sometimes you see in these old 80s Bollywood movies, you have the hero hanging by these chains in the cellar of the prison or whatever. So one chain is called I, and the other chain is called mine. And these two are keeping us bondage in the material world, because for the fulfillment of I and mine, we're doing everything, right? So take Krupa's example, for instance. She said, just trying to satisfy everyone else. So you had a certain perception of who you were, and you wanted to make sure that that identity that you think you are is what everybody else also sees you as. And so that drive to constantly make others see you as who you thought you were was basically where the bulk of your life was being invested, right? Or in someone else's case, I'm a basketball player and these are all my shoes, or I'm a this, or I'm a choreographer, I'm a this, I'm a that, and these are all my possessions. So basically we live out our whole life before spiritual life with these twin ropes of I and mine. I am Harisham, I'm a man, I'm this, I'm that, and these are my things, these are my qualities, my dreams, my this, and I'm just going to spend the rest of my life trying to fulfill my I and mine desires, right? And so Devahuti, because she's, first of all, the mother of God and also the wife of a great sage, Kardama Muni, she recognizes that I'm an illusion. I'm actually tied by these ropes of I and mine. And as a result of this, I'm suffering. But she also recognizes something very important, that actually this illusion that I'm in is caused by the energy of the Lord. It's interesting, everything is, we understand this, right? Everything is the energy of Krishna. From the spiritual world to the material world, everything is the energy of Krishna. The only reason we think of something as separate from the energy of Krishna is because we have forgotten Krishna. We've forgotten our relationship with him. So we forget the ownership of this. We forget who truly owns this world. It's just like this, right? Suppose I go into Chaitanya Kishore's house and his wife is a really good cook. She fed me one time. And I go into his house and I open the fridge and I see all these wonderful, nice Maharashtrian preparations. And I just start taking things one after the other, forgetting who actually owns this house, forgetting who owns the fridge and who owns all the food in the house. I don't even bother to ask, Prabhu, do you mind if I eat some of your food? This is how we come into this world. We're given a house, a car, a job, a bank balance, a wife, whatever, or a husband. And we get into the state of forgetfulness. We forget that actually none of this is mine. I came empty-handed. I'll leave empty-handed. All of this belongs to the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada writes, right at the very beginning of this chapter, he says, sinful activities are those activities performed in forgetfulness of our relationship with the Lord. So Devahuti is pointing out, because I've forgotten my relationship with the Lord, I'm in a state of false ego and bondage. And as a result of that, which all of us are in also, we end up doing sinful activities. And what are sinful activities? Anything that's done forgetting our relationship with the Lord. Very simple definition, right? Whatever. So when we try to enjoy something in this world without first thinking of its relationship with Krishna, without thinking of our relationship with Krishna, in a way it's sinful. You know, it's why in the Gita it says one shouldn't eat things that haven't been offered to Krishna. Now, let's also be a little practical at the same time. We're not all pure devotees. We're not all like, you know, we don't see everything as a manifestation of Krishna's energy. So we do have this vision of duality, right? Some things are Krishna's and some things are mine, right? Like, you know, in most of our houses, we have altars. So we have plates for Krishna to offer, to make offerings. So we're not, this is Krishna's plate, but this is my plate. You know, so we do live in this duality, and that's a healthy place to start. We can't artificially pretend to be pure devotees. So we might not, because of our life situations, we might not always be able to offer everything we eat to Krishna because we're traveling, we're on the road. But at least mentally in our minds, we can think of Krishna before we eat something, and at least be thankful like we have something to eat, right? So you may not always be able to make a proper offering. So I'm just saying that because of where we're at, we may not always have this vision, and that's okay. We don't have to beat ourselves up over it, because we're starting on our way to Krishna consciousness. So Devahuti, she wants this freedom from the bodily concept of life, which, by the way, is the root cause of all our suffering in this world. We think of ourselves as these material bodies, and as a result of that perception, everything that we see and experience in this world is seen through the filter or the lens of our material body and ego, right? So if you're someone who has a certain type of psychological buildup, like you think everything is okay, let's just take a very political issue right now, vaccines. All right, let's not get into the, are you pro-vac, anti-vac? That's besides the point, right? What is the point, though, is that a lot of people's opinions on whether one should take the vaccine or not has nothing to do with science. A lot of it doesn't have to do with science. A lot of it just has to do with their own preconceived psychological buildup, right? They don't trust authority. They don't trust the government, right? They don't trust modern science. As a result of this, they view the world through the lens of that preconception, that concept of who they think they are, and they determine we shouldn't take the vaccine. For some people, they've just grown up always thinking that science is right. So they see the world through that lens and they think, what's wrong with you? Take the vaccine, right? So in many cases, it's not always based on science. Sometimes it's a lot of it is just based on our own sense of self-identity. This is the bodily concept of life, to see the world as you think of yourself. So you never actually see the truth. You never ever see objective reality. What we see is something very, very subjective based on our self-conception. So she wants to be free of this. This, by the way, is the goal of a genuine yoga practice, is to free us of this subjective perspective to reality. Because if we always see the world according to our likes and dislikes, according to who we think we are, we will never actually see the world for what it actually is, right? So she's asking her son, Kapila, please free me from this bodily concept of life. So then Kapila Muni begins to explain a bona fide system of yoga. And this I thought to be was very, very profound. This is the 13th verse of this chapter. And I thought what he says in here is really profound, because oftentimes when I talk to people about spiritual life, there's a few questions that are very, very similar. For example, how do you know it works? A lot of people ask, how do you know Krishna consciousness works, right? What are the symptoms of somebody who's enlightened, right? I'm sure you've had, when you speak to some new family, they're just becoming devotees, And they might tell you like, oh, but Prabhuji, like my parents are worshipping Ganesh and Shiva. What is the difference? You know, they're also doing puja, you're also doing puja, right? What is the difference? Maybe you've had this question when you're preaching to families sometimes. So this verse is actually really profound, because Kapila Muni says, for it to be a bona fide system of yoga, of self-realization, it has to contain three very prominent factors. The first, it has to highlight the relationship between the Lord and the soul. Okay, so a system of yoga that does not take into consideration that sambandha gyan, the relationship of the jiva, which is us, with the Supreme Lord or Bhagavan, that does not recognize that relationship, does not highlight that relationship, cannot be considered a bona fide system of yoga, right? So for example, many times in America, in yoga studios, they'll talk about everything but this. They'll talk about breathing, they'll talk about the modes of nature, they'll talk about karma. They love talking about karma, reincarnation. They'll talk about reincarnation. They'll talk about pranayam, the asanas. You know, they'll talk about everything but this point. And this, you know, this relation between the Lord and the soul. Prabhupada once went to a Gita conference in Indore. It was organized by the Gita Bhavan, some place in Indore. And he went there, and there were all these quotations from the Gita. But Prabhupada didn't see a single picture of Krishna. Nowhere did he see a picture of Krishna. Nowhere did he see any mention of Krishna. So he asked the organizers of the festival, this is nice, but what about Krishna? He's the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. And they said, oh, we're not interested in Krishna, Swamiji. We're not interested in Krishna. We're interested in what he says. We're not interested in him. So we, the followers of Kapila Muni and Srila Prabhupada and the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we don't accept that to be a bona fide system of yoga. If you're not going to recognize the relationship between the Lord and the soul, if you don't highlight that as an important consideration, then we don't see that as a bona fide system of yoga. The second point Kapila Muni says is, for it to be a bona fide yoga system, it has to benefit the living entity. Some benefit should arrive or be derived to the living entity as a result of the system of yoga. What could be that benefit? The feeling of happiness, the end of illusion, the awakening of your true self. And the third thing is, it should cause detachment from happiness and distress, right? Many times people, especially in the modern age, people want to be spiritual, and they do all kinds of things to be spiritual. They go to South America and go on ayahuasca trips, right? They what's the funniest thing I've heard? Naked goat yoga. It's a thing in California. You do yoga naked in a room, and then they release baby goats into the yoga studio. This is part of the practice. Is they call it goat yoga, naked yoga, chocolate and cheese yoga. You do yoga, then you have chocolate and cheese afterwards. So there's so many different ways to try to feel spiritual, right? You could take psychedelics. I meet a lot of people all the time who tell me about mushrooms. This is really big, right? Amongst young Americans, they love taking mushrooms, especially this. They're called psilocybin. There's some particular type of mushroom that's really popular because it apparently opens up your third eye and it releases some fluid. I can't remember now what it's called. Maybe somebody can type in the chat. But all of these, and I always ask them this one question, right? Like, okay, you do all these things. You do your naked yoga and your mushrooms and your ayahuasca. Are you experiencing detachment from suffering? Like, can you detach yourself from a negative thought? Can you detach yourself from pain or even happiness? Anything that kind of destabilizes you from who you are. Are you able to do that? And people are like, I mean, no one wants to admit it. So they'll say something clever like, yeah, sometimes, but not all the times. That's usually the answer I get, But actually, if they were so confident, if it was actually working in their life, then they would have some experience of that, and they would be able to confidently say, yes, I'm able to. But occasionally, I'm not able to because of this reason or that reason. But you can just see it by the way they talk, by the way they live their life, that these other, you could say, artificial practices of spirituality or things that are not based on scripture or a tradition or a practice, it does not necessarily produce detachment from happiness and distress. By the way, it's important to remember that even as practitioners of Krishna consciousness, if we're not experiencing detachment from happiness and distress, we have to look at our own practice and ask ourselves, am I doing it right? So many times devotees have been practicing for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but then we're struggling with the same sort of material attachments and desires that we were struggling with 10, 15 years ago. So we have to re-examine our practice and ask ourselves a very tough question. Do I need to change? Do I need to improve my practice? Do I need to do something a little differently? Because when you do it right, then you will experience detachment. We, not you, all of us, will experience detachment from happiness and distress. So Kapila Muni says that when you do this yoga practice, what it does is it removes the impurities covering the soul. But this particular yoga system, which he will refer to and talk about, which is Bhakti actually, is only possible by worship of the Supreme Lord. So unless there's worship of the Supreme Lord as a core part of this practice, you will not be able to derive the full benefit of this practice. You will not be able to remove the impurities covering your soul. And now he comes to what I would say, just like when you have a sandwich or like a really nice burger, you have like the bread on top and the bread at the bottom, and you have some useless stuff called lettuce and more useless stuff called tomatoes. But then you have the real stuff, which is like that aloo tikki, that potato patty, or maybe like a vegan burger, right? Imagine if I gave you Chaitanya Kishore a sandwich and it had amazing bread, amazing lettuce, nice thick slices of tomatoes, but absolutely no filling, right? Would you eat it? You would be like, what is this bakwas? What is this useless sandwich? So in the same way, my humble reflection is that I think the main essence of this chapter is this, what Kapila Muni talks about now, because he's brought us to understand that yes, we need to be free from the bodily concept of life. Yes, we need to discover the goal and the purpose of our existence. And we do that by practicing a bona fide yoga system, which involves worship of the Supreme Lord. Yes, this is all very, very well and good. But how does one actually enter into this system and progress and grow and really succeed in the system? And now he talks about the importance of devotee association, or I would say the relationship with the saint, the relationship with the sadhu. It's a very famous verse here that he speaks to his mother. He says, Prasanga majaram pasam atmana kavayo vidu, saiva sadhu so prito moksha dwaram apavritam. Every learned man knows very well that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement of the spirit soul, right? So we understand that those of us who accept the philosophy of reincarnation, that the soul recycles in this world, birth after birth. Why? Pursuing our material attachments, right? So when you have a desire to do something in this world, Krishna is so merciful, he gives you another chance to go back and try it again, right? Just like, what's a good example? This is going to make you guys laugh. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to spend like every waking hour together, like all the time. And he loved beating me up. And I, for some reason or the other, by the next day, I had like short-term memory lapse and I would totally forget that he was beating me up the day before, right? And one tradition we had was every Saturday morning, we would take a 1 hour long bath together. We would play in the bathroom, we would slip and slide. And he would always beat me with this like wet t-shirt. That was like that's what brought him a lot of joy. And I would always cry and I would say, I'm never doing this again. But then I would forget by next Saturday. So what would happen is every Saturday I would cry and I would tell my mom, like, I'm never doing this again. And the next Saturday I wanted to take a bath with him again. And then my mom was like, don't you remember what happened last Saturday? Don't you remember how he beat you? He made you cry. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think he'll do it again. And then, I would just forget. And I would back in the bathroom, like playing for a while and then crying. So in the same way, we souls in this material world, we come to this world. We want to experience some joy, but we suffer as a result. But then we forget. And so then we have to come back. And Krishna is so merciful. He lets us, just like my mom. She's like, you know what? Okay, I can't stop you. You have to learn your lessons your own way. So she let me go back in and I would get beaten up and I would cry. I never learned my lesson. Now I eventually finally did. But in the same way, Krishna looks at our consciousness and says, okay, you still want to do something in this world. You still want to become a big this or a big CEO or the next whatever, the next, head of Google. All right, go for it. Give it a shot. See if it works out for you. And he's waiting for us to realize that maybe this isn't the recipe for success, materially and spiritually, to just keep pursuing material desires. So that's why this verse says every learned man, very important, right? Not just an ordinary man. A learned man knows that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement of the spirit soul. Why? Because it keeps bringing us back again and again into the material world. And honestly, it puts us on this treadmill where we're just always chasing after happiness in the future, which is also a form of suffering. So it's suffering to keep taking birth again in the material world time and time again, but it's also suffering to just be endlessly chasing material happiness. Because the interesting thing about material happiness is as soon as you have it, your mind changes. It's like this. Chaitanya Kishore has two very beautiful kids, right? Imagine his daughter comes and says, Dad, I really want the new AirPods. I really, really do. And for weeks and weeks and weeks, she's going on and on about the new AirPods or the new AirPad or whatever. So finally, he's a great dad. He gives in. He buys her the AirPods. What happens a week later? She's bored with it. The mind has now shifted, and now she wants the new pink unicorn that walks and talks, who knows, right? So she's a child, so she doesn't realize what's happening. But we as adults also don't realize what's happening. We have these material aspirations. I'll have a 6-bedroom house. I'll have a Tesla. We get it. And then guess what? The mind now, and then we think I'll be satisfied, right? Because the way satisfaction works for the conditioned soul is we think if I can fulfill the desires of my mind, I'll be happy. The mind has a desire, and then the ego thinks, let me fulfill that desire, and then I'll be satisfied. That doesn't always happen, because as soon as you satisfy one desire of the mind shifts, right? So Krupa just graduated college. She's about to start working at JP Morgan, great company, right? Everybody, I'm sure a lot of her classmates are like, wow, you're so lucky working at JP Morgan. Maybe she also feels good, right? Then she starts working, she realizes, man, this is a lot of work. Like, it's a big bank, and now I see why they pay me the big bucks, because I got to work like 60, 70 hours a week, And then, so then her mind like is looking for an escape. So she might have some idea, okay, you know what, I'll work 3 years, I'll save up enough money to buy my own apartment, and then I'll quit, I'll be satisfied, I'll move on to something else. Guess what happens? You hit your financial goals, you hit your material goals, whatever, you get there, and then the mind shifts. Now it's like, no, how about 3 more years? Now I want a bigger apartment. I want a bigger car. Matter of fact, I want to run the New York office. It just keeps shifting. So you're just always, in the material world, Krishna says in the Gita, happiness in the mode of passion means we're always running. We're always running to keep up with the mind. Like, now the mind wants this, now the mind wants this, now the mind wants this. So this, every learned man knows, is the greatest entanglement for the spirit soul. Not only does it recycle us in the material world birth after birth, but it also keeps us endlessly pursuing something in the material world. But that same attachment, Kapila Muni says, but that same attachment that we have for the things of this world, when it is applied to the self-realized devotees, it opens the doors of liberation. So this is his gateway into this topic of how, if you want to practice this yoga system that involves worship of the Supreme Lord, right, we have to become attached to devotees. We have to learn this path from devotees. And the interesting thing is, and I want to take reflections on this in just a minute, when we think about it, it is sadhu sangha that moves us from anywhere in bhakti all the way to perfection. Right? It's by associating with devotees that we go from being just like lost in this material world to being somewhat curious. Whoa, what's the purpose of life again? Oh, these monks seem so happy, right? Prabhupada said, they look at us chanting, they think, these are nice people. That is the beginning of their spiritual life, Prabhupada said. As soon as that thought comes, these people are nice. They seem to be happier than me. I have a godbrother. He was very, very rich, very rich. He was telling me how he became a devotee. He was in Miami walking with a team of lawyers, his own personal team of lawyers. He was crossing the street and he saw Harinam. And he said, in that moment, I had this thought. I said, I wish I could be happy like those guys. He had that thought. I wish I could be like them. They seem so happy. And then, lo and behold, 9 years later, he becomes a devotee. And now he has this really cool program. He bought a big bus and he decked it out into a dance studio. And he drives across Europe throwing dance parties. He calls them transcendental dance parties. He makes like electronic music, but then they all get prasadam and Prabhupada's books at the end of the party. So this is his way of preaching. It's pretty cool. Anyways, so with sadhu sangha, it begins our spiritual life, right? We appreciate the devotees, and that makes us curious. And as we, associate more with devotees, we go from curious to just doing what they do, right? We wear the same kind of cloth. We start chanting Hare Krishna. We start putting on tilak. We start offering our food to Krishna. As we associate more with devotees, and ideally, as we keep going, it's nice to always have some association that's more advanced than us. Because if you want to keep growing in life, you have to always have somebody in your life who you can practically relate to and have a relationship with, who's more advanced. And what does it mean to be more advanced in Krishna consciousness? It means to be more detached from matter and more attached to Krishna. That's literally what it boils down to. Anybody who has more devotion and emotion for Krishna and more detachment from the material world and material desires, that is in a simple sense what it means to be more advanced. So as we keep associating with devotees, and especially the more advanced devotees, we go from being curious to just doing the activities to loving the activities. You come to a stage in your spiritual life where, like, you know what? I know a very famous Kirtaniya. He's a very famous Kirtaniya now. But in his younger days, I heard this from his very best friend, like very close friend. He used to party all night, drink all night, get high. Then he would come to Mangal Arti and lead a rip and roaring kirtan for a solid 45 minutes to an hour, and then go home and sleep. And he did this for like a couple of years, all through high school and college, So he loved doing kirtan, and now he's like one of the most like famous kirtaniyas in our movement. Is a wonderful, wonderful devotee. But the point is that even though he had these material desires to enjoy drugs and partying and all that stuff, he didn't let it get in the way of his other attraction, which was to kirtan and chanting for the pleasure of the Lord and the devotees, right? And as he kept associating with more and more devotees, he realized, you know what? What if I just did kirtan, and not did this other stuff? How much nicer would my kirtan be if I just came and sang for the Lord, not when I was just high and drunk, but I actually, I got a good night's rest and I came just for the pleasure of the Lord and the devotees. So in this way, he kept associating and kept advancing. So a stage comes when we go from just doing the activities to loving those activities, to the point where we're able to give up things that get in the way of us doing the activities of bhakti. And as we keep associating with more advanced devotees, and by hearing from them, when something very magical happens, which is that our attraction for the activities of bhakti then shifts to that personality who is behind the activities, which is Radha and Krishna, right? And Vrindavan. And so it explained by Shiva Shankar Thakur that we go from being attached to the angas of bhakti, which is hearing, chanting, remembering, to that personality who is worshipped by those angas of bhakti. And we become very conscious that actually I'm doing these activities for the pleasure of Krishna, to become a servant of Srimati Radharani. And as we keep associating with more and more advanced devotees, hearing from them, then something very wonderful might happen, which is we might cultivate a desire to actually discover our personal relationship with Krishna, our own individual relationship with Krishna. So all of these are the gifts of Sadhu Sangha, right? From Sadhu Sangha inspires that initial spark of just curiosity and interest, and further on and furthermore to practicing, to falling in love with the practice, to falling in love with the idea of meeting Krishna and being with Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, to ultimately discovering our eternal relationship, and to ultimately going back home, back to Godhead, right? There's a progression in bhakti. We don't just, it's not healthy to think that you just chant, and one day you die and you wake up in the spiritual world. That's, if it was that, like you could say, simple or unscientific, then the acharyas wouldn't write so many books, right? The acharyas have written so many books with a very systematic progression and an explanation of how elevation in bhakti takes place. So we should be aware of these things, and that way, we can prepare ourselves for the long journey, right? Because along the way, we'll have to, examine our practice and really ask ourselves, how can I grow? How can I improve? Before I go further, I want to take a few quick reflections and have a story to tell about the importance of devotee association. I want to take a few quick reflections on, tell us about a time in your life when your heart was touched by a devotee. Any devotee, Prabhupada, your spiritual master, some brahmachari you met, walking down the street in Bombay or Pune or London or India. Tell us about a time in your life when your heart was touched by a devotee and why. Anyone, let's take a few reflections. Chaitanya Kishore, since you're the only one who has your camera on, you want to just grab the mic?
Yeah, sure. So, Prabhu, my introduction to Krishna consciousness has been through reading Prabhupada's books and reading his life story. Basically touched my heart.
Mm-hmm.
That is where I got pulled into devotional service. Practically speaking, I didn't met any devotees before that. Just because I read Prabhupada's life story, and it's an amazing story. So I mean, if you just meditate on how he did things, you will see Krishna's hand there. So that's what kind of pulled me and inquisitively. And after reading his books, which made a lot of sense to me, I was really touched by that. And then following on, afterwards I met devotees, and I see. So right now I see Prabhupada as my, inspiration, and whoever reflects that inspiration, that's where I get attracted to.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, really nice. Yeah, reading about Prabhupada's life story was also very inspiring for me, especially because I kept thinking about how he was so, I don't know why, like he was so old. And how could he do this at such an advanced age? Like, I have uncles who are Prabhupada's age when he left India, and they're like retiring. They just sit in their porch and, watch the sunrise and sunset.
Agree.
And so I was just so impressed, at that age. And I always tell my dad, I'm like, why are you being so lazy? Look at Prabhupada, 68, he left India, 65, sorry, and he crossed the ocean with nothing and started a worldwide movement. I have a private message here. The question is, how do we approach someone who is more advanced for association? So this, Kapila Muni will explain in the next coming verses that the heart of association is to hear their Vani, which means that you can associate with any advanced devotee if you can sincerely and with focus and prayerful heart, if you can hear their katha. And when we hear their katha, a lot of things happen. Their mood enters our heart. their purity becomes appreciated by us, and so we aspire to become like them, and we generally feel inspired in spiritual life. So that is how we associate with anybody who's more advanced than us. It's hearing. Hearing is the primary process for association, just sitting and hearing. And the beauty is, because of so many audio recordings, you can associate with Radhanand Maharaj in the morning, Gaur Govinda Maharaj in the afternoon, Tamal Krishna Maharaj in the early evening, and Prabhupada at night. I mean, you could just, imagine if you heard from 4 or 5, sadhus in a day, and like you actually took time out to, it could be a very dynamic spiritual life. But that's in one sense, the curse and the beauty of audio recordings, because they're so ubiquitous. We take it for granted. We don't appreciate it. I remember back in the day, my Guru Maharaj was telling me, when Prabhupada would record a new lecture, right, or a new book or something like that, these tapes were like gold. If you got a hold of the tape, then quickly somebody was making copies to distribute it all over the country, because they were all eagerly waiting. When will this new lecture arrive? When will this new tape arrive? When will this new book arrive? They were always so thirsty. Our problem is everything is available at the click of a mouse. So we don't always appreciate the potency of the recorded voice or the printed message, because it's so easily available. But we should remember Mahaprabhu, when he traveled through South India, he was so eagerly looking for a copy of the Kurma Purana that, when he found a copy, he had to sit there patiently copying it by hand. That, imagine if you have to copy the entire Bhagavatam by hand. I bet you would really appreciate your copy of the Bhagavatam, and you will worship it and read it every single day. If that's how much effort you had to do to get a copy of the Bhagavatam, And for us, I know, because when I used to live in the temple, we had so many editions of old Bhagavatam copies, and we were thinking of creative ways to recycle them. We were giving them away, So for us, it's just, we suffer from this overabundance curse. There's just too much of it available. But still, the point is, if you can somehow appreciate the Vani of a great soul and really connect with that Vani on a regular basis. I have one practical tip for all of you. Please don't mind if I share this. Give me a second. This is super useful and super helpful. Where is it? Where did my little box go? I have this little device. I don't know where I put it right now. But I highly recommend it. It's this little device I have where you use a USB flash drive, and you plug it into the device, and whenever you turn it on, it picks up from where it left off. You can fill it with lectures, so you don't have to go on your phone, look for a lecture. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you can flick it on, and then you're hearing transcendental vibrations. And as you go to bed, you can flick it on. So it's a really cool little device. I don't know where I must have put it, somewhere in the living room. But yeah, as the more we can hear from great souls, the more association we have with them. So it's simple, just hear more, and hear with sincerity and focus. So another message says, my heart was touched by a devotee when I came to Goloka Dham. This is a temple in Germany. And one devotee said, this is Prabhupada's family. We go beyond blood. And I felt such a close familial bond after the retreat. I was really touched. Thank you. It's a really nice reflection. Adam says, touched by a devotee's knowledge and otherworldly drive to help others. Stellar/clear knowledge plus compassion. That's nice. So I want to share a quick story about the perils of not having devotee association, how this can really, you could say, put our bhakti into so much danger or risk. This comes from the Mahabharata. One time, Krishna wanted Arjuna to appreciate the value of devotee association. So they were in the forest, and they were, I think, either lost, hungry, or tired. Something caused them to stop and visit the hut of this old man who lived in the village, who lived in the forest by himself. And he had doing puja arti. He was a great devotee of the Lord. But he had these swords hanging in his hut. And they saw this person, all day he was worshiping Krishna, singing Krishna, 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 Krishna. And at one point, Arjuna asked this man, what are these swords for? These swords hanging on the wall. And he said, well, that first one, I'm going to use it to kill Yudhishthira. And I was like, what? And I said, yes, I will kill Yudhishthira with this sword. Why will you kill Yudhishthira, Maharaj? Because he made my Lord go to Hastinapur as his messenger, making him run errands. Arjuna was like, wow. What about that second sword? And the old man, not knowing who Arjuna is, says, that one, I will use it to kill Arjuna when I ever see him one day. And Arjuna said, really? Why? And the old man said, because he made my Lord a chariot driver. My Lord was driving his chariot. You know how you drive a chariot, right? It's like you use your foot as the gas pedal. You use that foot to hit the muhut, or the chariot driver, I forget what they're called in Sanskrit, on the shoulders. You tap them to direct which way that you want them to go. Because the Kshatriya, he's busy fighting. He's using his foot to drive the chariot by kicking the chariot driver to go right, to go left. So can you imagine kicking Krishna on his shoulder? and you know, Krishna wanted that. Krishna like loved that. Krishna was very happy with that position. But can we even imagine such a thing? We go on the altar, we do so many, you know, purushcharyas, purifications, mantras we chant, all these rituals. I mean, can you even imagine kicking Krishna on the shoulder? I mean, I can't even imagine such things, you know. But this was the intimacy of Krishna and Arjuna. The point was, this old man, because he didn't have devotee association, his worship of Krishna was isolated from devotee association, so he couldn't understand something very significant. What is the heart of Krishna? What is in the heart of Krishna? What is it that actually brings pleasure to Krishna? What brings pleasure to Krishna is loving exchange with his devotees. His devotees serve him and he serves his devotees. He was very happy to be the messenger of Yudhishthira Maharaj, to go to Hastinapur and deliver a message like a common messenger boy. He was very happy to do these things because he loves the Pandavas. But because this old man in the forest was practicing his spiritual life without the association of devotees, he could not understand this very essential point about the heart of Krishna. So carrying on then, Kapila tells his mother that you should become attached to such sadhus, to such saints, because when you do, it counteracts the effects of material life. So sometimes devotees struggle with giving up certain things in this world. I know myself also, I struggle with certain things like maybe going to bed late, right? We have struggles in spiritual life because we should always remember the atmosphere is very much, in a way, always urging us to go in the opposite direction of spiritual life, right? Whenever I come back from Mayapur and Vrindavan, I always feel this in America, because when you're in the Dham, in these holy places, everything in the atmosphere reminds you of Krishna, right? Even the guy selling Belpuri, it'll be called Shri Krishna Belpuri Wala. You know what I'm saying? Even the guy who sells pipes, it'll be like Radharani Pipe Store, you know, something like that. You know, everything reminds you of Krishna in the Dham. The air reminds you of Krishna. The dust reminds you of Krishna. The temples remind you of Krishna. Then when you come to America, nothing reminds you of God. You know, everywhere you look, it's like advertisements for buying a car or, you know, going on holiday or, you know, whatever. So it's very difficult we live in an atmosphere that's always pushing us towards the material world. So Kapil Muni is saying, if you become attached to devotees, however, to great saints, then that attachment in your heart will actually weaken the attachment to worldly things that's created by the atmosphere of this world, right? If there's, and you can try this, you know, it's a very powerful experiment. I remember for myself, I'll tell you guys an honest story. When I was first starting Krishna consciousness, I used to party, used to drink. It's what everyone does when they're young, right? And especially on the train back from downtown to Chicago, it was the Metro. It's like the suburban train. And it used to be full of these men and women who were just finishing up their day at work, and they'd all be sitting in their brown paper bags, drinking a tall 24-ounce of beer or wine, right? And hour-long train ride back to the suburbs. And I'd just been practicing for like 3 or 4 months, just super new to Krishna consciousness, but had a really stressful day at work. You know, I don't know what that's like. I haven't gone to a real job in like 8 years. So I don't know what it's going to be like for me in 2 years when I start working again. But Chaitanya Krishna, you know what I'm talking about, right? Deadlines, you know, team members messaging you, hey, where's that report? Where's that thing? And then you have this, and then your wife comes and says, when are you going to buy the groceries? You know, it's like coming at you from every single angle. And because I was so young, I you know, the only thing I knew was like, just drink and forget about this stress. And so had a long day, was on my way to the temple. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to buy a beer and I'm just going to like drink it on the train and it'll calm me down. I'll feel really relaxed. But I remember specifically, we had discussed this particular section with Jai Jagannath in his room discussing Bhagavatam. And I just remembered like, you know, what would Jai Jagannath think if I told him, Prabhu, I just drank a beer before coming to the temple today? You know, how would he react? How would he feel if someone he's trying to inspire in spiritual life was so weak that I couldn't even handle one stressful day at work? I just gave in, drank a beer on my way to the temple. He wouldn't judge me. He was cool, you know. But still, somehow when that thought came into my heart, I thought, I can't do it. I don't want to disappoint him. You know, and that's, in a very practical sense, that's what happens when we become attached to nice devotees, is we think of how they would feel if we did something that goes against our spiritual interest. And it holds us, and it gives us strength. It gives us strength to actually combat the material atmosphere. And since then, I always use this little trick. Whenever I struggle in the material world with some desire that's not very wholesome, I think of my spiritual master and I try to use that to control my mind. And I think, what would my Guru Maharaj say if he knew that I had this desire, I wanted to do this? Of course, we are human beings, you know, we shouldn't pretend that we don't have material desires. We do, you know, and not every material desire is like, you know, like bad for us. Sometimes we have to fulfill certain simple material desires and it actually can help us in our spiritual life because it can give us some peace of mind so we can do our bhakti. But sometimes some desires are not very wholesome, not very good for our spiritual life. So when we struggle with those, we can think of our gurus, we can think of great saints that can give us the strength to combat. So as one keeps almost done here, and Kapila Muni says that this association with devotees is the most important element in the advancement of bhakti. And as the devotee keeps doing this, he's liberated because his subtle body, which is where his ego is resting, dissolves. So by the practice of bhakti, our subtle body, our ego dissolves, and the soul is now able to have a direct relationship with the Supreme Lord very beautifully. And so at the very end of the chapter, Kapila Muni explains that by this process, one is able to see the charming, beautiful form of Krishna, the smiling form of Krishna. And this was super inspiring for me. So my class is called When Bhakti Blooms in the Heart. And so when Bhakti blooms in the heart, what happens is we get a vision of Krishna. Why? Because Bhakti is the Shakti of Krishna. It's actually Srimati Radharani. And it's something that even attracts Krishna. So you can think of it like this. If you think of a beautiful flower that contains nectar, and Krishna is like a bee. So when Krishna smells the presence of that nectar, he can't help but be drawn to it. So our acharyas explain that when you have bhakti in your heart becomes like a beautiful flower that's filled with nectar. And Krishna, like a bee, he's just drawn to it. Krishna is drawn to bhakti. That's why Krishna is drawn to his pure devotees, because they're reservoirs of bhakti. That's why we pray to the pure devotees, because they carry Krishna in their hearts. Why is that? Because Krishna, like a bee, is always circling their hearts, smelling the fragrance of bhakti that's emanating. And because of that compact relationship between the pure devotee and Krishna, when we pray to the pure devotees and ask for their blessings, it actually works in our life, because they're carrying Krishna within their hearts, because they're carrying bhakti within their hearts. And as a result of that, the devotee will actually have a vision of the smiling form of Krishna, the charming form of Krishna. And this, of course, is the ultimate fulfillment, right? Who doesn't want to see Krishna, right? I mean, I want to see Krishna. I'd love to see Krishna. and with that one glimpse of Krishna's beauty, it's described the most beautiful thing in this world becomes ugly. The most amazing sense enjoyment will become pale with just that tiny glimpse of Krishna. And that'll be wonderful. That'll be very, very wonderful. So this is the chapter. So this is the end of the chapter. I just took a quick look at my notes. I tend to drift sometimes. So this is the conclusion of the chapter. Kapila Muni says this is the yoga process that in other words frees one from the bondage of one's false ego and situates one in a spiritual practice by the strength of associating with great devotees, by wonderful devotees. And as a result of being situated in spiritual practice, a regular, consistent spiritual practice that purifies the heart of false ego, one will eventually have a vision of Krishna and ultimately one's personal relationship with Krishna. So this is my presentation. If anybody has any reflections, corrections, please feel free to share. It'd be really nice to hear if anybody has any reflections.
Very beautiful class, Prabhu. I have one point not a point, but I want to appreciate the point that you made. In the test to understand how or what we're practicing is yoga or not, the 3 points, those are very good takeaways for me.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I mean, what we see around us today, as you mentioned, the first point is missing the relationship, the sambandha gyan between the soul and the super soul.
Right.
Yeah. So most of that is just physical exercise that ends up doing that. And the last point, the cause of detachment. We don't see any detachment developing because of these yoga practices that are happening. So that's a very good point, and a very good takeaway for me to explain to people who are new to this process.
Yeah, it's a great verse. I also, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is cool. I can just share this with people. And whenever they ask me, what's a real process? What's real spirituality? I can say, does it talk about these 3 things? The 3 points, someone just messaged me saying, what are the 3 points? The 3 points were a real bona fide system of yoga will talk about the relationship between the Lord and the living entity, the super soul or supreme soul and our soul. 2, it'll bring benefit to all living entities. So it should be beneficial. And the 3rd is that it creates detachment from suffering and happiness. So if any of these items are missing, then we cannot consider it to be a bona fide system of yoga like that. Anybody else have a reflection or a correction or anything that they heard they want to reflect back. No? Any messages on YouTube? Is there
No messages on YouTube, Prabhu. I don't see anybody chatting on that. Do you have? I think we are already on the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Do you have a like a takeaway for the week that you would like to address?
Yeah, I think my only takeaway for the week is maybe we can use this week to really reflect on how can we have more devotee association with advanced souls, and if that requires maybe more hearing from them, or perhaps you're lucky enough to have like a personal relationship, maybe we can even write to them looking for guidance. So anything we can do this week to improve or increase our sadhu sangha. I'm very lucky because Jai Jagannath just arrived in Chicago today. He'll be staying with us for a couple of weeks, so
Yeah,
I have sadhu sangha across the hallway.
great. No, definitely. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for emphasizing this point of. Okay, there's some comment here from Shana. Krishna like a bee, smelling fragrance of bhakti emanating from pure devotees. They carry Krishna in hearts and carry bhakti in their heart. Love that point. So good. So thank you so much, Prabhu. And I will see everybody next week. I think we have good opportunity for devotee association. As Balram Prabhu mentioned, we are opening up the temple again from July 25th. So, whoever is around and local here, please do come and participate. Thank you so much. I think I will be closing the live streaming now.
Right, thank you,
Thank you
Prabhu.
so much. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.